Thank you all for joining tonight. Welcome to the Delaware River Frack Ban Coalition Webinar Forum, The Real Voices of the Marcellus Shale, Why Frack Wastewater Must Be Banned. And I'm Tracy Carluccio. Thank you for coming. Please introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know where you're from. And I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes before we get going. We are recording tonight's session, and we do also plan to keep the session to an hour to honor your time. So we'll be ending by 8 p.m. Tonight we have presentations by two special guests, Janice Lee Blanek and Lois Bower-Bjornson. Then we'll have a summary of the connections between what we learned from our speakers and our fight for a complete ban on fracking in the Delaware River watershed. And then a question and answer session moderated by Karen Faraden, where our speakers will address your questions. As you listen, please write down your questions in the Q&A box. Don't use the chat, use the Q&A box. It's at the bottom of your screen because it's easier for us to see all of your questions if you put them there. After the Q&A, Barbara Arundel will close out the forum for us tonight. So after the webinar, we'll send a follow-up email with a link, and the link will be to this recording here tonight. So you can share that far and wide, and you're welcome to do that. There also will be other information, such as a link to the action alerts that we have been issuing over the last several months during our webinars, and also a copy of the recording of this webinar will be submitted to the Delaware River Basin Commission and the voting members, the governors of the 4 states and the Army Corps, so they can hear our speakers firsthand. Our campaign is working to ban the export of water for fracking outside of the Delaware River watershed, and also banning the import of frack wastewater into the watershed for storage, processing, discharge, and disposal here. The Delaware River Basin Commission has enacted a ban, but illogically, they're considering allowing wastewater and water import and export. Our webinars this summer have delved into some of the top issues that have been involved, and you'll hear more about that from Barbara Arundel at the end of our webinar. So we're now going to turn to our speakers, and first is Janice Lee Blanek. On August 7th, 2016, Janice lost her 19-year-old son Luke to a rare pediatric bone cancer called Ewing's sarcoma, and it has taken the lives of several young people in Washington County. In March of 2018, she retired after working for 12 years as a corporate receptionist at Crown Castle in South Point in Canonsburg, which gave her the time and the flexibility to get involved with the Environmental Health Project of Pennsylvania. And through the Environmental Health Project, she met Lois Bjornson and also became active with other families in doing presentations on the dangers of fracking and looting, and also taking part in tours, helping to lead tours with Lois of the families and also of the homes and the communities that have been harmed, impacted, or completely destroyed, hosting it for lawmakers, community representatives, and the media. Her goal is to honor her son Luke's name in the fight for a clean, safe, and healthy environment. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Janice so we can hear from her. Welcome, Janice.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, ladies and gentlemen. Again, my name is Janice Blanock. I am a 26-year resident of Cecil, Washington County, Pennsylvania. I've been blessed with 4 children in my life, and now I'm the grandmother of 3. I'd like to thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak to you as a concerned citizen, but more importantly, as a mother who lost one of the greatest gifts in life, a child. First, I would like to share with you an essay that my daughter wrote her senior year of high school, and then tell you a little bit about Luke's story, and finally speak to you regarding what's going on since I met and spoke with Governor Wolf almost 2 years ago in Harrisburg. Here's Kate's essay. As you grow, you learn more. If you stayed as ignorant as you were at 22, you'd always be 22. Aging is not just decay, you know, it's growth. It's the positive that you understand you're going to die and that you live a better life because of it. In his book, Tuesdays with Maury, Mitch Albom explains the importance of growing and living life to its fullest potential, no matter the circumstances. The quote implies that age is defined by something other than time, something intangible that differs from person to person experiences. Similarly, being an owner means continually changing and bettering yourself, being able to admit mistakes and learning from those experiences that helped me grow as a person. However, one experience has changed me more than others. 4 years ago, my older brother Luke was diagnosed with Ewing sarcoma, a rare and aggressive pediatric bone cancer. Right before my junior year of high school, he passed away. However, during the 2.5 years of chemotherapy, radiation, and surgeries, you would hardly know he was sick. He rarely dwelt on having cancer, felt sorry for himself, or wanted sympathy from anyone else. He simply never let dying get in the way of living. What amazed me the most about him was that he never stopped learning. He finished high school, enrolled in college, taught himself to play ukulele and guitar, began learning Spanish, took a real estate course, and so much more. All of this occurred after he was told his disease was terminal. When I first sat down to write this essay, I didn't want to write about my brother because it was his story, not mine. However, the more I thought about it, the more I realized how monumentally his life impacted mine. Without him and without his death, I would be a vastly different person. It's a common assumption that wisdom inherently comes with age. However, this is only half true. With age comes experience, and with experience comes wisdom. One of the wisest people I have ever known was only 19. The greatest lesson I learned from the life of my brother was that a person can be 100 years old, but not have lived a single day. I learned that it's not about how long you're here on earth. It's about what you do with the time you're given. Growth does not necessarily occur with time. Growth is the result of continuously challenging assumptions and a perpetual desire to learn. My experiences changed the way I looked at life. Things that used to be problems were now minor inconveniences, and minor inconveniences ceased to faze me because I saw what truly mattered. He taught me to challenge myself, to work endlessly to realize my goals, and to do something that I love because life is too short. I learned from him to appreciate how beautiful life is, even when it's not. So a little bit about Luke from my point. Luke attended Macmillan High School. He was an excellent student and looked forward to attending the University of Pittsburgh after graduation. He enjoyed playing most sports, but excelled in baseball and basketball. He was kind, outgoing, friendly, and wise beyond his years. He loved life and looked forward to each day with a smile that was always present. On December 4th, 2013, our healthy, athletic teenage son woke at 3 a.m. He was experiencing excruciating pain and numbness in his legs. We took him to Canonsburg emergency room where they sent him to Children's Hospital by ambulance. A long sleepless night and an MRI turned our world upside down. On December 6th, we were given the dreadful news that our son had a baseball-sized tumor on his spine and that it was a rare form of cancer called Ewing sarcoma. It required immediate emergency surgery. There was no medication that could take away that pain. It was pressing on the nerves. So really all we could do was just hold him, love him, and pray. The surgery was a welcome relief as it took the pain away, but this was just the beginning. Before the treatment began, we met with doctors to go over all the medications and possible side effects. After about 2 hours of listening and asking a lot of questions, we asked for some time alone. Can you imagine thinking the only chance of your child surviving is to consent to treatment with drugs that could quite possibly damage their heart and other vital organs? On December 31st, after several weeks of recovery from the surgery, he began his first chemotherapy treatment. During his treatments, he also had limb salvage surgery. He had 39 rounds of chemo and 88 days of radiation to multiple sites. He also had limb salvage surgery at MD Anderson Hospital in Houston, Texas, to remove part of his hip and femur to eradicate another tumor. For about 3 years, we experienced many highs and lows. In December of 2015, at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, we received catastrophic news that the cancer was terminal and that he had several weeks to live. Can you just, for one moment, place yourself in a room where your son, your 18-year-old child, is given a DNR form to sign and then meeting with palliative care regarding hospice? Well, surprisingly, Luke pulled through that low, and on February 19th, 2016, he and his girlfriend, Natalie, got married. Luke was determined to keep battling this cancer and living, so he continued his treatments and ultimately ended up at Cleveland Clinic for the remainder of his treatments. As my daughter mentioned, Luke continued living, learning, and enjoying each day. All the while, we watched as Ewing sarcoma gradually took his life. Luke passed away at home on August 7th, 2016. Well, several days later, Kurt and I found a letter on his iPad that he had written to us. He had mentioned that he was concerned that he didn't do enough during his time on this earth, and anyone who knew him knew otherwise. Anyone that has ever lost a loved one knows pain and grief. However, there is no loss like the loss of a child. The loss of our son Luke was and will always be devastating and horrific. No parent should ever have to worry that their home, the air, the land, and water surrounding it might be unsafe. No parent should ever have to watch their child suffer and die, especially when there's even the slightest possibility that it could be something in the environment causing it. We are now in a group that nobody wants to be in. And sadly, our story is like many families in our community and communities all over Pennsylvania. Regretfully, I know some of these families personally. Some attended, they lived nearby. They belonged to our church. Some attended Canna McMillan High School. So I just find it so hard to believe that for such a rare cancer as Ewing sarcoma, that so many others in this area have been diagnosed with it in such a short period of time. My husband and I, along with hundreds of other families that have or had children with cancer, are participating in an epidemiological study with Baylor College of Medicine through the ReasonWhy.us, a nonprofit project to identify the environmental toxicants that are poisoning our planet, poisoning our children. Dr. Philip Landrigan, a scientific advisor to the ReasonWhy.us and director of Global Observatory on Pollution and Health at Boston College, said, and I quote, "We must support strong research programs that include epidemiological and toxicological studies. We must strengthen state and federal laws to better protect our children, and we must enforce those laws." Last November, I traveled by bus with a group of concerned citizens and other families whose children had died from Ewing sarcoma or who were still suffering from it at the time. It was physically and emotionally draining. However, we were elated several days later when Governor Wolf made a public announcement stating, "I want to thank the families that have shared their heartbreaking stories. I understand and support the concerns of parents and the desire of community members to learn more about the possible reasons for these cancer cases. Ewing sarcoma is rare and currently has no known environmental cause, but it is imperative that we do all that we can to thoroughly research and advance the science on the health effects of oil and gas extraction. Since then, thanks to the strong advocacy of impacted families, the University of Pittsburgh will be conducting a thorough research investigation on behalf of the state of Pennsylvania into the impacts of fracking on the health of children. The university will be calling upon residents to participate in two separate investigations, the first of which will focus on known and unknown health impacts on children, and the other on the prevalence of childhood cancer, both in the proximity to fracking development. These studies are currently being designed and should be concluded within 3 years. The studies will look at pediatric sarcoma cancer cases in proximity to a variety of pollution points, including those of oil and gas infrastructure and the legacy pollution left behind from various extractive industries that have operated in our region for many years. A friend of mine and a community organizer for the Center for Coalfield Justice, Heaven Sensky, was invited to serve on the advisory committee for the Ewing's investigation. If you would like to know more or get involved, you can contact her at email heaven@coalfieldjustice.org. I don't know what caused Luke's cancer or any of the other rare cancers in Southwest Pennsylvania, but I am deeply concerned, as we should all be. I know that the industry is protected by trade secret laws that prevent residents from knowing the details of what kind of chemicals they are using and what kind of chemicals and hazards are in the waste produced and disposed of in our communities from fracking. This is a bipartisan issue. It affects all of us. It is our right and our responsibility to ensure that the environment we live in and will pass on to future generations is safe. Luke is gone, but I plan to keep fighting for a clean, safe, and healthy environment, and I'm asking for your help. Luke left this earth thinking that he didn't do enough, so I intend to honor him by making sure I do. If together we can save children and spare families from the devastating heartbreak that we live with every day, then our time here will have value and meaning. So what will you do with the time you are given? Will you learn all you can about the safety of our loved ones due to the environment? Will you question what's happening in our communities, insist on investigations, and put pressure on our elected officials? Will you challenge them to own up to mistakes and be honest about their findings? Will you stand together and force them to do what's right? Or will you allow them to turn a blind eye and be silently complicit? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janice.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Next, we're going to hear from our next speaker, Lois Bower-Bjornson. Lois is the mother of 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. And Lois and her family live in Washington County. And remember, this is the most heavily fracked county in Pennsylvania. She's the Southwestern Pennsylvania field organizer with Clean Air Council, and she hosts the Frackland tours that we've been hearing about. Frackland tours were designed to give people a firsthand account of what it's like to live and grow up in the shale fields of Washington County. Folks have the opportunity to meet impacted residents, to hear their stories, along with viewing various oil and gas infrastructure that's there. Lois is a board member of the Center for Coalfield Justice, POPCO, and Protect PT. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Lois, and welcome.
Good evening. My name is Lois Bower-Bjornson. I'm the Southwestern Pennsylvania field organizer with Clean Air Council, and I host Frackland tours. Frackland tours were implemented to give people a first-hand account of what it is like to live and grow up in the shale fields of Washington County, Pennsylvania. I live here with my husband and 4 children in the most heavily fracked county in our state. Some of the things you may not know that you're being exposed to with oil and gas are chemicals. Chemicals like benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, formaldehyde, and lesser known chemicals that are linked to a range of health effects, including respiratory issues, gastrointestinal problems, and skin and eye irritation, organ damage, reproductive harm, and increased cancer risk. All of these chemicals are found in the fracking process. These chemicals are also found in things like gasoline, pesticides, industrial solvents, glues, varnishes, paints, car exhaust, industrial emissions, and tobacco smoke. They also are commonly detected in air emissions from fracking wells. My family was part of a study with Environmental Health News and reporter Christina Marusik. This was a study that was the first of its kind. It measured what is in our bodies. We wore personal air monitors and our urine was tested. More than half of my family's samples exceeded the US 95th percentile for, I cannot pronounce this one, but it is an acid and it's a biomarker for ethylbenzene and styrene. And 41% of my family's samples exceeded the US 95th percentile for hypochloric acid and transmuconic acid. These are both biomarkers for toluene and benzene, respectively. Exposure to these compounds is linked to skin, lung, and eye irritation, central nervous system, liver and kidney damage, and cancer. My 3rd son, Gunnar, his urine sample contained a level of mandelic acid, which you know is a biomarker for ethylbenzene and styrene, that was 50 times higher than the average American, according to CDC data, and higher than levels typically seen in the average adult cigarette smoker. He doesn't smoke. I have the highest level of naphthalene that was detected in my body in the whole study. Naphthalene is a chemical that is found in industrial sites. My urine sample was more than 15 times higher than the median level detected in other southwestern Pennsylvania residents. Now on to our water. My family's water source is the Monongahela River. Every quarter, we receive notices from Tri-County Water, our local municipal water authority, that we have total trihalomethanes that are above acceptable levels. Total trihalomethanes are a byproduct of industry. We also have had 2 quarters last year with higher levels of radiation than were acceptable. I'm not sure what radiation levels are acceptable. And according to the study with Environmental Health News, our DEP and the Bureau of Safe Drinking Water stated that our municipal water contains unregulated chemical contaminants, including halocetric acids, total trihalomethanes, nitrates, and inorganic compounds, among others. And these notices also advise anyone that is pregnant, has an infant, has a compromised immune system, or is elderly should consult a physician before drinking their tap water. All 4 of my children were raised on this water. We also found detectable levels of 20 of the 40 chemicals commonly used in fracking that we looked for in samples from at least one of those locations. And the locations where the water was tested from was our kitchen sink with our reverse osmosis, our bathtub, and our hose outside. They all contained benzene, which we know is increased cancer risk, naphthalene, which is in my body, and it is also listed as a possible carcinogenic to humans by the EPA. Gunnar, again, my 3rd son, his air monitor recorded the highest levels of both propylbenzene and 1,3,5 trithybenzene detected among 39 total air samples. My air monitor recorded the highest level of hexanol, ethylglycohexane, and octane seen in the study. Our air samples for my entire family have exceeded one of the state guidelines for 3 chemicals. the recommended limits on benzene, ethylbenzene, and naphthalene, exposure set by the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessments to keep cancer risk below 1 in a million. I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our water. It's pretty overwhelming, isn't it? I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Westmoreland County landfill. So, landfills are taking on residual waste from the fracking industry. This is not a sweet little product as it's labeled residual. It really should be labeled hazmat waste. It's hazardous to people's health. There are fracking chemicals that are in this waste, and they're being dumped into our municipal landfills, and our municipal landfills cannot take this waste. Therefore, in any landfills, you have leachate, which is sort of the watery substance that comes off of any trash, really. But this watery substance is radioactive. This watery substance was piped directly into the Monongahela River, as told by our state DEP, and all the radioactive waste is now flowing into our drinking and bathing water, our washing clothes water, everything you use water for. So, now that you have some of the facts and you've heard what can happen to families and children, communities, and your grandchildren, and for future generations, are you still wanting to listen to those in power that will tell you everything will be all right and that it's okay and these are acceptable levels? Because I'm here to tell you that they're not acceptable levels. So do whatever you can to keep any type of fracking waste, injection wells, anything that has to do with oil and gas out of your watershed. Thank you. I appreciate very much being a part of this presentation, and I look forward to answering some questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lois. We're thrilled that you're here for joining the question and answer session. So now I'm going to give a little bit of a summary connecting these pieces with our struggles here in the Delaware River watershed before we go into questions and answers. We've heard tonight from Janice and Lois, who have experienced directly the impacts of living in the most intensely fracked county in Pennsylvania, Washington County, in the Marcellus Shale. This is a terribly cruel and outright immoral way to measure fracking's impacts. People are not supposed to be used as subjects in industrial pollution activities, but this is how fracking and its activities, such as wastewater production and disposal, are exploiting communities in Pennsylvania and places beyond. Even with emerging data and the publication of health reports that are disclosing fracking's link to these adverse health effects, Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection continues to issue new permits for fracking and frack wastewater treatment plants and discharges, even allowing frack waste to be spread on roads. And Pennsylvania health agencies are getting away with doing nothing to stop the abuse. Finally, we've heard from Janice tonight that a study has begun and is underway. But perversely, these agencies, over the decade and a half that fracking has occurred in Pennsylvania, act as if the sick are supposed to prove the causation and the sources and the occurrences and explain why their kids are sick or even dying, as we've heard from Lois tonight, where fracking is occurring. And furthermore, because of the lack of accurate accounting of what's in the frack wastewater and the lack of tracking its waste stream and the crucial information that's missing and how each phase of the fracking's cradle to grave journey impacts human health, the truth is obscured and doubt allows the industry to dominate. This is not an accident. The missing links are deliberate and have directly resulted in the perpetuation of industrial pollution that is crippling public health and that will last for generations in our environment. The fact that the radioactive elements and other known contaminants we've heard about tonight are not tracked, recognizing the hazardous waste that it in reality is, from the point of origin at the fracked well to its final disposal, allows its polluting pathway and impacts to remain hidden. And no one knows all that's in the frack waste, as was said by our speakers tonight, because frack fluid formulas that are used to frack wells are kept secret as proprietary, and methods to detect many of the worst contaminants are not even known. You can't find or measure what you can't see or identify, but ignorance is not bliss. The truth hurts. The fact that the wastewater being produced by fracking is too toxic to be cleaned should lead to the recognition that frack waste simply cannot be allowed to be disposed into a shared environment. Yet the release of fracking pollution continues despite the devastating impacts. It even expands, or they try to expand, and that's where we all come in. Where's the US Environmental Protection Agency, by the way, the federal protector when you need them? They're absent. They have opted out of issuing any federal regulations or guidelines about how to properly process, handle, and dispose of frack wastewater. In fact, EPA just issued the most recent effluent limitation guidelines for other contaminating discharges and stated they are not issuing any federal guidelines for the treatment of wastewater produced by oil and gas extraction activities at this time. We are on our own to deal with this disaster. What does it mean for our mission here to see frack wastewater completely banned for import to the Delaware River watershed? There's a basic question that we must ask the governors of the 4 watershed states and President Biden's representative from the Army Corps of Engineers who make up the voting members of the DRBC. They will cast the votes in the coming months about the import of frack wastewater, as we'll hear more about from Barbara Arundel at the close of tonight's forum. Today, we ask, commissioners, are you willing to risk the health, water, and air of the communities of the watershed despite the dangers posed, despite the growing evidence of unavoidable toxic impacts, and despite the testimonies of the people here tonight who have been impacted and continue to be impacted? Are you willing to put even more people in harm's way by expanding the spread of this toxic wastewater even further? The responsible thing for the agency to do is to ban frack wastewater from being imported into the watershed that 17 million people use for drinking water and into the river and tributaries that both human and non-human communities in 4 states call their home. Of course, the truly ethical action is banning of fracking and its toxic wastewater everywhere for the sake of all, including our future generations, as well as those suffering today. So now I'm going to turn it over to you. And I hope that you've put any questions that you have into the Q&A box, because Karen is going to moderate Q&A in order for us to hear a little more for what you're most interested in from our speakers. Karen?
Thanks so much, Tracy, and thank you, Janice and Lois, for your presentations. We have one question in the box so far. Please add your questions. I'll get to that one in a second. But the one I wanted to ask about first was one, it's one of the newer stories. So I just hope that maybe one or some of you would want to comment on it. And that is the discovery of PFAS chemicals being used in fracking. And that was something that we really weren't certain of for a long time. And so I know, Tracy, you've worked a lot on PFAS, and it looks like we've lost Lois for the moment, but maybe you want to comment on the fact that it took the Philadelphia Inquirer to actually figure out that it had been used in Pennsylvania in 8 wells, I believe.
That's right. There was a study that was published by Physicians for Social Responsibility. It was written by Dusty Horwit, and he was a featured speaker on one of our webinars when this report came out about the use of PFAS, perfluorinated compounds, in frack fluids that are throughout the United States. So that report had information from various states where fracking is occurring and showed that there are chemicals that are perfluorinated chemicals that are part of the fluids, but it's kept secret because they're considered to be protected as proprietary by the owners of the formulas. However, through some detective work and tracking down names of obscure chemicals that you couldn't really tell what they were, Dusty Forward and the Physicians for Social Responsibility found out that these truly were PFAS compounds. And if you know something about this, maybe you've heard, this is what they call forever chemicals because they don't break down in the environment. Once they're released into the environment, they stay there forever. And that's what makes them so toxic because they don't break down, they actually build up. And when people drink water or consume fish, or breathe air that has PFAS compounds in it, it builds up in their bodies, concentrates in their organs and blood, and then that level of concentration in their blood can cause diseases that are linked to PFOA, PFOS, and other PFAS compounds. It's become a huge national issue, and discovering it in frack wastewater was a shocker. And I know that Dusty has been working on the research to discover this for many years. And the report, if you haven't seen it, will be in the links that we'll be sharing when we send the recording out. And also his talk is in one of the webinars that we're putting the link to in the chat tonight. And you can find out more about it. But the problem here is that they were actually not able, because of this trade secret cloak that protects the industry, despite the impacts on the public, was used in Pennsylvania so effectively that it took then subsequent investigations by the Philadelphia Inquirer editorial board, and they ended up identifying that actually, yes, there were PFAS compounds used in Pennsylvania in fracking. And this is, of course, adds to an already toxic wastewater stream and toxic solids waste stream that we're experiencing as a result of fracking in Pennsylvania and surrounding states, and makes it all the more concerning. So that's just a brief summary. The report is, I think, 100 or so pages. There's a lot of great information in there. I hope I was able to answer it.
Thanks, Tracy. And Lois, you were just switching devices, I believe, when I was asking about PFAS chemicals. I don't know if that's something that you've spent any time on, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to speak out about that if that is something that you wanted to comment on, because that's such a recent development in what we know is in fracking waste.
So I have just recently started to delve into the PFAS chemicals just because of exactly what you said, Karen, that I am aware that this is happening and going on. And I'm sure that these chemicals are in our bodies as well. So I'm just starting really to reach out and research this some more, but it will definitely be something that I am, adding to my list of things to put into what harms fracking does.
Yeah, I was wondering, I know that Christina had no plans immediately to do another body burden study, but I'm wondering if that might be the subject of one now that we know about those chemicals. It might be something that could be coming in the future. I sure hope it is. So, here's a question that's come in from the participants tonight. It says, it's a long comment, so I'll read it quickly, but fracking must stop, but until it does, those who frack should be required to use a tracing chemical in their fracking fluid, and board members need to be held accountable. A lawyer told me that when a board member knows that something is dangerous to people and votes to do it anyway, that the corporate veil can be pierced and that they can be personally sued. The question is, do they know the dangers of these chemicals, and how do you prove that in court? Anybody want to take that one on?
Well, while the others think about if they want to take it on, I would just say that, this is sort of what I was talking about in the little summary that I gave before the Q&A, is that they really do not test or disclose what's used in the fracking fluids as well as what's in the wastewater. And that's how they sidestep getting the evidence that would prove exactly what is in excuse me, the fluids and the wastewater and the air, excuse me, that is that results from fracking activities and also from the volatilization of different chemicals from large wastewater ponds. And the results of this means that you really don't have the data that you need in order to take somebody to court and prove it. I think that the study, from what I heard from Janice tonight, that the study that is ongoing now as a result of the advocacy and the commitment of people who are experiencing the impacts of fracking in Pennsylvania, that study may yield some very valuable information that can help connect the dots so people can get accountability from the industry. Because right now that accountability is avoided because there is deliberate blanks in the information that's needed in order to prove causation.
And I can give a quick example. It's not completely related, but it's something happening right now. And that is that Tracy mentioned that some of these chemicals are spread on the roads. You know, this wastewater containing chemicals is spread on the roadways, and it's supposed to be under a moratorium in Pennsylvania. And so there's something under the Bureau of Waste Management called a co-product determination, which is a beneficial use of these chemicals that allows them to be spread if the company who wants to do the spreading can say that they've evaluated the commercial products that are on par, presumably, with what they want to spread. And if indeed they are on par, that their chemicals no worse than the things that are commercially available. In other words, they can spread it without having to tell the DEP. They have to record, you know, they have to document what they've done in their self-determination, but nobody really knows what that's going to look like. It's just starting to happen now that the DEP has even requested any of those documents. And this is since 2018. So who knows what those documents are going to look like and what kind of process they went through to do their self-determination. But, you know, when things are so obscure that the DEP doesn't even have a record of not only what was done, when it was done, but how much was spread. This kind of information just isn't even known by regulators. How can any of that stand up in court when the regulators don't even know? Nobody's keeping track. So I'll get off my soapbox for a minute because there are other questions I want to get to. Brett has a question. Do any of you know that the DEP outreach collected real-time data when a few trucks dumped either flowback or produced water to the collection system leading to the Halstead Great Bend Joint Sewer Authority and caused half the plant to be shut down to save it, and then the other half had all the bacteria killed off? Is anybody familiar with that situation well enough to speak to it? And since I stumbled over the name, it's Halstead Great Bend Joint Sewer Authority. But I know nothing about that one personally. Anybody else?
No, but if we do find something out about it, like a link to a report or something, we'll put it in the follow-up email that goes out with the recording. So we can't answer it tonight, but hopefully we can get a little information for you. We save the chat and we try to answer questions from the Q&A afterwards.
And then Raina has, oh, you're the chairman of the authority, Brett. Okay, great.
Oh. Sounds like he can be a speaker next time.
Raina looks like she's entered a comment. One thing to know about PFAS and oil and gas wells is that according to some of the researchers Dusty worked with, the bulk of the PFAS is going to show up in the first flowback waters and may not show up in later flowback waters to the same extent. So if the DEP or anyone wants to know the true level of exposure, somehow access to initial flowback needs to be given. Is there any, I mean, again, I get this comment more than a question, but anybody want to react to that?
I think she's absolutely right. You know, this is the problem. They don't require that kind of testing at the wellhead. We really need to test it every step of the way, from the time it reaches the atmosphere after a frack job to its endpoint. We have to know, because it does change, and also, you know, things interact with each other in this toxic fluid. It's sort of a chemical mix that comes back up, and things are reacting to each other. It's really important to test it all the way along the way if you want to accurately characterize what's in it and then deal with it.
It looks like we got a question in the chat. Are there or have there been any fracking activities in the Pittsburgh vicinity?
I think probably Lois can answer that. Janice, I don't know if you live close enough to Pittsburgh.
I do. I'm about 20 minutes outside of Pittsburgh, and from what I understand, fracking is banned in Allegheny County, so that would be Pittsburgh. So I believe the answer to that would be no, but please check on that because I by no means am an expert, but I believe fracking is banned in Allegheny County.
I know there had been a fight for a long time to frack by the airport, and there had been another fight to frack in county parks because it was a city ban in Pittsburgh. And the other question is always define fracking activity. Like what they're talking about doing right now is putting fracking waste on barges down the Ohio River. I think it's the kind of broad question where when you're in a region that's so heavily impacted, what kind of air quality are people experiencing in Pittsburgh because of things that are happening around them. So, it's a complicated thing to say that, there's nothing happening or that some of these things would be considered fracking related activities.
Right, and I believe there are probably a lot of things that are happening that we don't know about and they don't want us to know about.
Well, there's probably that.
So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why we don't want them to be moving this frack wastewater around too, because you can live very far away from where fracking is occurring and still get impacted by the frack wastewater.
Exactly.
Also the air, the air currents, depending on where you are downwind, for instance, of an air shed that's contaminated, it can be very far. So frack wastewater is taken hundreds of miles to injection wells, and places that would never think that they would be impacted can be impacted by fracking because of that, that build out of the activities associated with it.
And the problem with the trialomethane was that it was showing up in Pittsburgh, in the rivers around Pittsburgh because of the benzene, I guess it was. Pardon me, I don't know. I don't know my chemicals well enough, but it was a marriage of two chemicals. One that was the chlorine in the wastewater treatment facility, and then the water that was coming through because it was in the water was meeting up with that and causing these carcinogenic chemicals to form. So that's the other thing about how these chemicals encounter one another and what happens when that occurs, which nobody seems to really understand much about either. So I mean, it's such a complicated situation with so many moving parts. I wanted to get to one other question real quick before I ask the final question of Janice and Lois, because I need to turn it over to Barbara in 1 minute. But somebody asked about maps about the various permits that have been issued and the ones that have been used. And actually there are maps like that. Fracktracker.org has those. Actually, I used to use maps that came out of Penn State. So they do exist, and I can probably find the links to those to send to you, to send along with the links if you don't have them, Tracy. So I can send you links to share. But I wanted to ask Lois and Janice, having both participated in the tour that the Frackland tours that Lois hosts, what's your impression of the people who come through the tour, especially the legislators? Have you seen them do a turnabout? Has it been impactful on them in a way that would be helpful in Harrisburg to have more advocacy there?
Well, my opinion is while they're there, I think that they're really caught off guard and surprised and shocked and truly concerned. Now, where they take it when they come back, I'm not sure, because there's not a whole lot that's happened. But we're not going to give up, right, Lois? We have Lois and I met last week with Tim O'Neill, and I plan on scheduling meetings with our state representatives, Jason Ortitai and PM Snyder, and all the different representatives, and just keep knocking on doors until they get tired of hearing us. But I think they are definitely concerned, but are they on board enough to make a change, to be the first one to have the courage to stand up and voice concern? So, Lois.
Yeah, I would say that initially,
people are even emotional on the tours. Legislators are emotional, but are they going to move on it? I've seen a tiny bit of movement, but nothing that I think will, that is strong enough to be,
You're breaking up a little bit there, Lois. So let me just add one final thought, because I know you guys have done tours for so many different people, but one of the groups that has helped organize the tours on the legislative side is the Better Path Coalition. And what we encourage people to do, not that you haven't done that too. So I know you've reached out a whole lot and done a lot of that work, but we wanted people from the East to come out and go out West and see what's going on. And so if, now this is the Delaware River Basin oriented call. So please call your legislators or let us know who you think should be taking the tour. We'll call them and try to encourage them to go see it, because really it might not have added up to a whole lot so far, but I think we've seen more advocacy out of some key people in Harrisburg than we've ever seen before. So I would say, knowing how long this has been going on, that it has been something of a success. So I would hopefully, look forward to hearing from anybody, or knowing that you are actually reaching out to your own senators and representatives and asking them to take the tour. Lois is so accommodating. She'll do it anytime. So please consider that. Please consider getting your East Coast people to go out West.
One other thing that I would mention too is that because of COVID, there was a large time frame that nothing could happen. So, now that maybe we can get things back on track and offer more of the tours, like you said, Lois is extremely accommodating and works around everybody's schedule and just so. Hopefully things will pick up again and continue.
Well, thank you all. And I am a little remiss in getting this to Barbara so late. So Barbara Arundel, please take it away now.
Okay, so this summer's webinar forums held by the Delaware River Frack Ban Coalition have pointed out why, in addition to the now in place ban of fracking in the Delaware Basin, there must not be any wastewater import to the Delaware Basin or water export for fracking elsewhere. The DRBC will release draft regulations on these two issues for public comment by November 30th. The DRBC's obligation is to protect the resources of the basin, including the water, air, our health, and the health of the other inhabitants of this watershed. And it has done a good job over its lifetime. There is no possible economic or other reason to now import, store, process, or dispose of toxic waste in the Delaware Basin. Transport alone will result in illegal dumping and spills that could affect water supplies and health for millions of people. Export of water for fracking elsewhere can cause depletion of aquifers, streams, and the Delaware itself, with climate change compounding damage. And we know from other areas where there has been dumping in streams that the material stays in there for years and years and years, causing damage all that time. When the DRBC reveals its intentions with regard to waste import and water export, we must be ready to use the presented material to craft our comments so that we support the DRBC if they make the right decision and issue bans, or make them rethink things if they miss the mark. We have made the DRBC voters, the 4 basin state governors, and the federal component rethink decisions before. We are the jury in the court of public opinion. The 5 webinars we presented this summer covered an introduction by coalition members to the waste issues on June 16th. On July 24th, Dusty Horwitz exposed the health effects of highly toxic and persistent PFAS chemicals used in drilling and fracking gas and oil wells, including in PA, resulting in these chemicals being in the waste. On August 19th, Justin Noble revealed the terrifying levels of radioactivity in the waste from oil and gas drilling. On September 15th, Ted Auck from Frack Tracker laid out the enormous volumes of water being used that result in so much waste being produced. And today's event has given us a sobering look at the human health toll that follows the oil and gas industry. Links to the webinar recordings will be in the chat and in the follow-up email. Thank you for attending our webinar forum series from the Delaware River Frack Ban Coalition. The coalition is Burke's Gas Truth, Catskill Mountain Keeper, Clean Water Action, Damascus Citizens for Sustainability, Delaware River Keeper Network, Environment New Jersey, Food and Water Watch, New Jersey Sierra Club, and League of Women Voters of Delaware. So thank you very much for attending and taking notes, I hope. So look for the links in the chat and it will be in the follow-up email. Good night.